Good morning. Again, we are so glad that you're here with us, the Aurora Vineyard. We started a series a little while ago coming out of the book of Psalms. And um, today we're going to talk from Psalm 5. We'll leave that summer playlist graphic up there. Today we're going to talk from Psalm 5, and we're going to talk about where we go for help. And so when I surrendered to ministry, my grandmother, my father's mother, her name is Nellie, and Nellie's from the mountains. Nellie's my grandfather, who I'm named after, was a coal miner, and that's where my people come from. And so when I surrendered to ministry, I remember telling my grandmother that I'd surrendered to ministry and I was going to Bible college, and she said, well, you don't have to go to Bible college. I'm like, yeah, Grandma, I really kind of do. And she goes, well, the Lord will just tell you what to say. And, in all my wisdom of 21 years old, I'm going, no, he won't. I've got to learn stuff from somebody, and et cetera, et cetera. And, Nellie was right about many things. And, Nellie being Appalachian, if it tasted good, it tasted better fried. Which we know, when we get to heaven, everything is fried. It's fried corn, it's fried okra, so we'll have the Reformed Apostle Peter's approach to bacon. There'll be bacon in heaven. We know that. I remember very clearly having that conversation with my grandmother, and at the time thinking she has no idea what she's talking about. Now, Nellie attended the Church of God, which was wound up all the time. I mean, Nellie's, if you've ever been to a Church of God or Assembly of God church, man, they get wound up, and Nellie got wound up. But I remember very clearly her telling me that. Now, before I tell you this next story, we should pray. Father, we thank you for being with us this morning. We thank you that we get to be in your presence and we get to be with each other. We are so excited for what you will do in our hearts today. So, Father, I pray that you would hide me behind the cross of Jesus, so he is seen and I am not, and he is heard and I am not. Father, the desire of our heart is to hear something from you that will change our lives. So, Father, give us ears and hearts and minds to hear from you this morning. In Jesus' precious and holy name, we all said. Amen. So, David and I share some very similar life experiences, and one of those things was obviously going to Bible college, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the things that you learn is how to preach, and you learn how to speak. And, I don't know if you know this, but like David's accent is fake. That's not really how he talks. This is just an affect so that he gets better service at restaurants. But one of the things that happened to David was that they teach you to speak, and one of the tools that they use is they will give you a handful of marbles, and you put marbles in your mouth and you speak. And the more, and so what that does is it makes you use muscles that you hadn't previously used. It makes you pronounce words, and you're very deliberate on how you say things. And so you start off with a handful of marbles, and the better you speak, then you can take more marbles out. So after 2 or 3 weeks, David is struggling a little bit, and he finally says, well, when will I be able to speak better and be a pastor? And they said, well, when you lose all your marbles. And so, ta-da! Yes. So, no, but you should be around David in other situations. This is not his real voice. It's very Eastern Kentucky. So, our summer playlist from the book of Psalms. When you read the Psalms from front to back, there's several themes that happen within them. And it's almost universal from Psalm 1 to the very end. And there's some patterns that repeat. And it's worth noting that. One is, like most songs today, songs are about love. Most songs are about love. And maybe it's love in a great way. It's Freddie Mercury singing, "Can anybody find me somebody to love?" Or maybe it's a little different, and it's Joan Jett and the Blackhearts singing, "I hate myself for loving you." It could be Journey, it could be Faithfully, it could be Ted Nugent saying, "You've got me in a stranglehold, baby." So the Psalms are very similar to that. It is David or Moses, whoever, writing these songs about love And that shows up consistently in them. And then the other thing that happens consistently in them is there's often a dichotomy. It is David or Moses, whoever the writer is, talking about an existence that's going on within them, and them chasing after God or having this struggle with God. And while the world around them seems to hate God and their lives seem to be easy. And so that happens throughout almost every psalm. There's this dichotomy of what's going on. And so Psalm 5 is very similar to that. And today we're going to talk about where do I go for help? That should say, where do I go? Where do I go for help? Now, for some of us, I'm a recovering workaholic. I don't know if any of you can relate to that. There's probably a certain number of years in my life where I got a great amount of value because of being a hard worker and being a smart worker. I always wanted to work smart, not hard. And so I got a disproportionate amount of my self-worth from that, which is incredibly unhealthy. And the problem with that is you don't know it when you're doing it. You just don't know. And that translated into church work and all that kind of stuff. And believe it or not, there was a time when I really cared what church people thought. Right? And thank you, Vera. Right? Because, well, if they don't like you, then you're not as valuable. Do you see how nefarious that is now? Right? It's not that I don't care about your opinions, and it's not that I don't love you, but man, there's such a very fine line and a very delicate balance in that sometimes. And so when life is hard, where do we go for help? What do we do when what is around us is not fun and it's not easy, and it seems like the people who don't love God, their lives are really great, and they're buying new cars and new houses, and they got brand new golf clubs, and like Bob, and it's just Les has just got a brand new driver, and that I recently was out of town. I played golf with a friend of mine, and Mark's a really good golfer, and we were playing in one 9-hole match. We were playing with guys who were older than us, and I'm not a great golfer. I love to golf, but Mark is really, really good, and these guys were out driving him. Oh, it drove Mark. It made him so mad, and he lost his mind. He went nuts. I'm like, dude, you gotta shut up, because I don't want to play with you if you're just gonna be this mad. But sometimes it seems like the people who don't necessarily love God the way you think you love God, their lives seem to be so much easier and so much less. Why are you confused by that? You think because you love Jesus, your life should be easy? When Jesus says, in this world you will have trouble, tribulation. Vera went big. I was just going to go trouble. She went full on tribulation. She's like end times, the rain of blood and stuff. So Psalm 5, verses 1 to 2, there's two things that happen within Psalm 5, two things that David wants. The first one is here, and we'll get to the second one about halfway through, maybe a little bit more than halfway through. David says, listen to me. Give ear to my words. Give ear to my words, O Lord. Consider my sighing. Now, I know me, as best as I can know me, and I sigh for two very specific reasons. The predominant sigh for me in my life, you know what sighing is, right? The predominant one for me is a sigh of contentment. And if you've been around me at all, and my sigh of contentment is, and maybe it's you when you've just finished cutting the grass and you've sat down in your chair or wherever it is you sit, and you've got a beverage next to you of whatever you're drinking. It should be iced tea, because that's the only kind of tea you should ever drink. There's no reason to drink tea that's not sweet tea. That people don't love Jesus who drink unsweet tea. We know that. That's in the book of something somewhere. So yes, the book of Lamentations. It probably is, because there's crazy stuff in the book of Lamentations. You're right. So that sigh of contentment. Or there's also the sigh of aggravation, right? When you're frustrated with whoever it is in your life or whatever situation, and you're just exasperated, and that sigh is a totally different sigh, and that sigh is, ugh, right? There's an ugh with that sigh, right? It's not the sigh of just simple contentment. It's that sigh of frustration and that sigh that communicates to whoever is in your presence, shut up, right? I can't remember if I told this story from this spot or not, but if I have, then please indulge me again. I had a conversation with some friends of mine on the golf course, and I said, I think there's a part of my personality that's unapproachable. There's a part of me that like communicates like unapproachable. And my friends say, we need t-shirts. On the front say, I have an unapproachable personality. And on the back it says, so shut up. These are my friends, right? David says, listen to my cry for help, my King and my God, for to you I pray. I want to be as deliberate as we can and really pay attention to the words that David uses. Listen, he says, give ear to me, listen to my cry for help. And he says, my King and my God, for it's to you I pray. In the morning, O Lord, you hear my voice in the morning. I lay my requests before you, and I wait in expectation. So it's not just where I get my help. It's also when. So if I'm waiting till my day has just blown up, have you ever had a day blown up? Like nothing went right, this appointment got canceled, this thing didn't show up when it was supposed to. Les's driver did not come in time for his match, and his Gene is now getting the brunt of that anger because Les is mad, and just nothing is going right, and we are so discontent about the simplest and the smallest of things. He says, in the morning I come to you. In the morning. I come to you in the morning. And maybe it's before your feet hit the ground, and maybe it's because you're not a human being until you've had coffee. And you're not a human being until you've had coffee with creamer in it, like Jesus drinks. And your life is just not right until you are able to have some coffee and you're able to focus and whatever that looks like for you. But do you cry out to God with your day and your struggles and your hurts and your worries and your fears, but also your excitement for what God is going to? Is that what your morning looks like? And so you went to bed with the full anticipation of being robbed of sleep because your anxiety overwhelms you and fear is overwhelming you, and just your constant panic about this, your child is messing up royally and you can't stop them. Or this project isn't, I was talking to George this morning and finishing up a job and going, okay, Lord, I don't have anything on the book, so what are you going to do about that? And then in one day, I get 2 phone calls. And I go, okay, I guess now we know what you're going to do about that. But David says, in the morning, I cry out to you. God, in the morning, I start my day in your presence. And let's go back to that verse, can we, AJ? At the very end of that verse, he says, I lay my request before you, and I wait in expectation. I wait, God, on you because I expect you to be who you are. I expect you to do what you do, which is love your children, which is redeem, which is rescue, which is all of those things. I lay all this stuff at your feet, God, because nothing good happens at my feet. When I try to be the boss, I mess it up. When I try to run my life Without you, it never turns out well. I lay my request before you and I wait with an expecting heart that you will do what you do. So it's not just where I get help, it's also when. And so when we start our day with an expectation that God is going to do something fantastic, that God is going to redeem, that God is going to rescue, that God is going to reward, that God is just going to show up and do something nice and fun for you that you did not see coming. And you look around and you go, oh, that's pretty cool. Because God loves his children, and he loves to give good gifts to his children. So it's not just when, or it's not just where, but it's also when. Verse 4. Now remember I said that there's this odd dichotomy in some of the Psalms where it's David saying, oh, God, I wait for you and I love you and you answer me. And then he throws something like this in. Because you're not a God who takes pleasure in evil. With you the wicked cannot dwell. The arrogant cannot stand in your presence. You hate all who do wrong. So he goes from, and this is on purpose. I really want you to understand this. He says, I start my morning crying out to you. And I cry out to you in the morning, and I wait in expectation. And then he says stuff like this. The arrogant cannot stand in your presence. Because you cannot be crying out to God as your rescuer and your redeemer and be arrogant at the same time. Either you're going to trust yourself or you're going to trust God. Now, as I told you, I'm a recovering workaholic. So am I going to trust God with my life, or am I going to trust me with my life? How many of us have a story of trusting ourselves with our lives and going, oh, what just happened? Yeah, and we look around and we go, well, that didn't turn out well. I hope nobody saw that, right? Ever watch somebody walk down the sidewalk and trip, right? And what's the first thing they do? They look around like, did anybody see that? And then they just walk on like normal. And sometimes we spend our spiritual lives like that. We mess it up and we look around and go, oh, I hope nobody saw that. And then we are so tempted to go back into that same mindset and that same behavior. You hate all who do wrong. You destroy those who tell lies. Bloodthirsty, deceitful men, the Lord abhors. Okay, so sometimes we're tempted to read that and we think of somebody in our lives. Don't waste your time with that. You think of you. God, I don't want to be that arrogant person. I don't want to not be able to stand in your presence. I don't want to behave in a way that you would hate me. I don't want to be destroyed because I'm a liar and I'm bloodthirsty and I'm selfish and I'm deceitful. God, I don't want to be that person. So how do I not be that person? That's a great question. Let's look at verse 7. But I, by your great mercy. Notice David doesn't say, but I who work really hard to make you happy. But I who come to church every week. But I who tithe. But I who do this. And you have your list of all your good stuff that you do, so that you can tell other people that you're a good person. And we've said this before, it's worth saying again. If you have to tell people that you're a good person, you're probably trying to convince yourself and not them. But I, by your great mercy, will come into your house. So there's an appropriate response. Do you see that? When we understand how merciful God is to us, it brings about a desire to be in his presence. Do you have people in your life that you don't really like? Let's be transparent. Now, maybe they be in this room. Maybe he may be speaking to you right now. But he might not be your favorite person in all the world. Or she. How much do you love being around them? Like, oh no, Uncle Bob is coming to lunch. Aunt Karen is coming to lunch. And you just dread it, right? But by your great mercy, I will come into your presence. So when we taste just a small amount of God's goodness and God's mercy to us, it should prompt us to want to be in his presence more. just like that person. I have an uncle who's passed away now. I lived in Indianapolis. And his name was RL. I had an uncle RL. I had an uncle JL. RL was Robert Lee. JL was James Linville. Who names your child Linville? Yeah, somebody. So RL, every time we saw RL, he would give me and my older brother silver dollars. Every time. I still have a bunch of those in my home. So guess whose house we wanted to go to? RL, right. We didn't want to go to JL's house because JL didn't give us silver dollars, right? But by your great mercy, God, I have experienced this from you, and so I want to be in your presence more. By your great mercy, I come into your house. In reverence, I will bow down towards your holy temple. Experiencing God's mercy should bring about certain behaviors in our lives. Romans chapter 9, verses 9 to 15. Paul says, this is what God says to Moses, I will have mercy on whom I have mercy. I'll have compassion on whom I'll have compassion. That's my choice, God says. So when we are tempted to look around at what we think somebody else's life is like, this is one of the tragic things. All we know about most people's lives is this much, because that's all we see. We don't see what home is like. We don't see what work is like. We don't see what they're married. We don't see any of that. We just see this very small glimpse, a very small window, and we assume certain things. So we may think God is just blessing that person, or they're merciful. And when my oldest son worked at the golf course, and he would come home just enamored by somebody gave him a really big tip, or this person is at the club all the time, and what they in the cars they drove, and he was enamored by that at first. And so we had this conversation. So why do you think they're there all the time? They're there every day. Why is that? Because they have a wife and they have kids. So why aren't they at home? Because they're escaping to the golf course. Because they don't want to be at home. So on the surface, we can think somebody's life is something, and it might be very, very different than how it appears. We might think that God is doing something for them, but that's just what they want it to look like. So God says, I'll have mercy on whom I have mercy. I'll have compassion on whom I have compassion. This is my business. I'll bless people if I want to bless them. It does not therefore depend on man's desire or effort, but on God's mercy. Do you get how free that makes you? That you don't have to work for God's love. You don't have to work for God's mercy. You don't have to work for God's attention. He gives it freely and generously. So we have a dilemma then on how we perceive or understand God, because we can think that God has an economy like ours. Well, if you're good to me, I'll be good to you. If you're nice to me, I'll be nice to you. And the minute you stop being nice to me, well, now the rules have changed. Or now we're reassessing what this relationship is like. This week, I met an agnostic. And I was introduced to them by somebody who had just met them that night. And the introducer knew me from a similar context. And so they introduced me as, oh, this is Will Stevens. He's a pastor. And immediately I was like, because I try not to tell people what I do, because sometimes they will stop being who they are. And I would much rather people be who they are and then go, okay, now let's talk. And so we've met, right? We've all met. I love to ask questions, right? So when Scott says, oh, this is Will Stevens, he's a pastor, and this lady I've never met says, oh, and the look on her faces, I couldn't tell whether she was excited or what, because that being introduced to a pastor produces a certain thing, right? It's either, oh, or, oh, right? So this lady says, oh, I'm an agnostic. And I said, oh, no, you're not. I've met her 2 minutes. And she says, I'm an agnostic. I said, no, you're not. No, you're not. She goes, well, yes, I am. I said, no, you're really not. But tell me how you got there. So she tells 2 stories. This lady is a little bit younger than me. She tells 2 stories about her childhood. One story didn't even happen to her. It happened to a relative. The other story, she was in a Lutheran church, and she and her sister skipped Sunday school to go play on the playground as a little child. Some guy, not even part of the church, walking up the sidewalk, berates them because they skipped Sunday school and they should have been in church. And I hear that story, and I'm like, well, that guy wasn't even in church. Who cares what he thinks? It wasn't like he was the preacher or whatever they called him in a Lutheran church who looked out the window and saw two little girls on a swing set and went out to berate them. This is just a dude walking up the sidewalk. Who cares what he thinks? That instant is what she held on to for 40 years. Isn't that interesting? That she held on to that so long, and that was what she was using to say she was agnostic. You're not agnostic. And her husband is standing right next to her, and he goes, nah, she's not. Like, thank you. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And so this opened up this conversation that lasted probably 45 minutes. So here's the question. You know Uncle Will. I'm going to ask you crazy stuff, right? So have you ever gone to a restaurant? Well, of course I have. Did you have a bad meal at any given time in your life? Well, yeah. Well, did you stop eating? No. Look at me. I've had a bad meal or two in my life. Does it look like I stopped eating? And the look on her face was like, oh. And so then it becomes light and it becomes funny, and we're able to steer it in the direction of there's a God in heaven, and he's probably the exact opposite of who you think he is. And I believe in the God of the Bible. And when life gets hard, what do you do without that? And even beyond that, if you're not going to believe in the God of the Bible, then how do you explain how we got here? Because if any of this happened randomly, that is such a ridiculous notion. So where this conversation took place, happened to be sitting at a bar. So I said, so somebody just made your drink. Did that happen by accident? Did all of a sudden how did those bottles get here? Was that all random too? Did the stuff that ended up in your glass, how did that happen? Was that random? Well, no. There was an intelligent design. None of this could have happened by accident. None of it. So then you have to get back to intelligent design, and I believe in the God of the Bible. That's who I believe the intelligent designer is. Your very existence, the existence of creation, according to Romans, cries out that there is a God in heaven. He says in verse 8, lead me. Now this is the second one. He says, give ear to my words, listen to me. And then in verse 8 he says, lead me, O Lord, in your righteousness because of my enemies. Lead me in your righteousness because of my enemies. Now you and I probably don't have enemies, literal enemies like David did. Like his son Absalom, who's trying to take over his throne, or the Philistines, or all the other Eans or Ikes in David's world that were fighting against him all the time and oppressing him. And so the person who didn't hold the door for you at the grocery store is not your enemy. The person who didn't let you into traffic, it wasn't a personal attack on you as a human being. They didn't see the Jesus fish on the back of your car and cut you off. I mean, that probably did not happen. You probably don't really have an enemy in the way that David is living his life with real life enemies. And so this is going to be hard for you to hear, but I really say this in all love. You're not the center of the universe. You're just not. You couldn't be. That is way too much pressure. So thankfully, God is handling all that stuff for you. And so you don't have these enemies. Now, do we have enemies in the world, enemies against the faith of following Jesus? Absolutely, those exist. But you personally, as an individual, maybe not. He says, Lord, lead me in your righteousness because of my enemies, because I want the people in my life to see that there really is a God in heaven. So make my paths straight. Make straight your way before me. Proverbs chapter 2, verses 12 to 15. Wisdom will save you from the ways of wicked men, from men whose words are perverse, who leave the straight paths to walk in dark ways. Now, if you heard me talk about my oldest son, Caleb, love Caleb. Caleb's 28. Some of you have been around me and with dinner, and Caleb's a funny kid. He's loud because his dad is loud. And even Caleb at times, I'm going, dude, you got to tell. He's like, this is how you talk too. Like, yeah, but I'm dad. I can talk like that. You can't. Take it down. You're here. I need you to be here. So this week, talking to Caleb, and here I'm working, and my customer is out helping us do some stuff. And Caleb, we're talking about relationships and people in our lives. And I said, I talked about influences. And he said, yeah, bad friends corrupt good character. And I dropped my tools. And I turned around. I said, what did you just say? He said, yeah, bad friends corrupt good character. I said, I know, but he goes, you've said that my whole life. I know, but I didn't think you were listening. And it's 1 Corinthians 15:33. Now, Caleb grew up in my home where if I said 1 Corinthians 15:33, the kids in my youth group said, bad friends corrupt good character. And if I said bad friends corrupt good character, the kids in my youth group said 1 Corinthians 15:33. So I said to Caleb, he goes, you've said that my whole life. Yeah, but I didn't know you were listening. He goes, I wasn't sleeping the whole time. Now, this is what I'm about to tell you is true. There was a point in time where Caleb did what AJ is doing now. He worked the slides, right? And I'm preaching. I couldn't remember the sermon, but I'm preaching, and I'm going through slides, and I'm saying, well, next up is this, and nothing's changing. Nothing's changing on the screen. And Caleb was far back, and he was in this booth, and I couldn't see him. He fell asleep. As he's doing my slides for my sermon, he falls asleep. And I'm like, oh, he'll catch up. And I'm just preaching. I'm thinking, oh, he'll catch up. Nothing. Somebody had to go back and wake him up. The oldest child of the preacher has fallen asleep literally at the wheel. He says, wisdom will save you from the ways of wicked men, from whose words are perverse, those who leave the straight path to walk in dark ways, who delight in doing wrong and rejoice in the perverseness of evil, whose paths are crooked and who are devious in their ways. Wisdom will save you from being that person. Now, whether you gravitate towards that wisdom or not is 100% you, nobody else. You can't blame mom, you can't blame dad, you can't blame your children. This is 100% on us. Either I will chase after wisdom and I will be saved from that way of thinking and that life, or I won't. Verse 9, not a word from their mouth can be trusted. Now this is back to Psalm 5. Not a word from their mouth can be trusted. Their heart is filled with destruction. Their throat is an open grave. And with their tongue they speak deceit. Declare them guilty, he says. Declare them guilty, O God. Let their intrigues be their downfall. Banish them for their many sins, for they have rebelled against you. So, again, don't worry about the people around you. You don't be this person. So here's what we need to do. We've said this in a way, and I'll say it this way now. That I need to delete my downward habits. I need to delete that behavior that is, because we tell ourselves in our lives to be going this way, but we have habits that are going this way. Those cannot exist together. I need to delete those habits. I need to get those habits out of my life that are leading me down. And I have to be honest about those. This behavior is not leading me to chase after God. This behavior is not leading me to seek wisdom. This behavior is leading me in the exact opposite way, but I continue to do it because I believe a lie about it. That's why workaholics are workaholics, because we're believing a lie about our behaviors, just like any holic, just like any addiction, just like any behavior. You're believing that it's getting you something, and it's not. It's probably only taking from you. So delete your downward habits. In our last section from Psalm 5, he says, "But let all who take refuge in you be glad. Let them ever sing for joy. Spread your protection over them, that those who love your name may rejoice in you." God is such a great, and to me, just a very interesting God. He says, sing for joy. Sing for joy. Spread your protection over them, that those who love your name may rejoice in you. For surely, O Lord, you bless the righteous. You surround them with your favor as with a shield. So almost every psalm, including this one, will be about what we pay attention to. Either I will let God be the boss of my life. Either He will be my protection. He will be my shield. If you've ever had God's favor in your life, you know it. Because it was anything you could have contrived. It wasn't anything you could have planned. It wasn't anything you could have manipulated. And so you just simply have to take a step back and go, oh, God favored me. God chose to be good for me. God chose to be good to me. God favored me. And it was like a shield around me. David has two things in this psalm. One, God, listen to me. Hear my words. Hearken to my words. And then lead me. We live in a world that does not like to be led. We do not, and we say this, we don't like to be told what to do. We rebel against that. We don't like to be followers. If I'm going to live this life that God blesses, then I need to follow. I need to be open to hear what God is saying to me personally, so that I can be led. Let's pray. God, we thank you for your word. We thank you that you do give us the book of Psalms, these love songs to us about following you, about obeying you, about being who you want us to be, how you want us to be it, and where you want us to be it. Father, help us to be people who cry out to you in the morning, that we start our day in your presence, that we wait with expecting hearts for you to show up in our lives. And Father, help us to be people who are willing to be led. Father, give us ears and hearts to do those things in our lives. We love you and we thank you for bringing us into this place this morning and into your presence. In Jesus' name we all said, amen.